Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is English, but immigrated to New Zealand when she was 59. She published her first book just before her 70th birthday and is currently writing book number 8. Having discovered her passion, she now intends to write till she dies. Living well is the best revenge, so they say, and one of her latest books is about abandoned wives. Beware ex-husbands of a talented writer. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Pat Backley.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Julia. That's absolutely, yes, perfect. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Pat, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, I think when I was a little girl, I had big dreams. You know, I wanted to be famous. I wanted to be an author. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a missionary. But of course, none of that happened. Life just took over. And when I was just before 70, we were in lockdown. My husband of 26 years had just abandoned me. And I was lying on the sofa. My only child was living in London. I live in New Zealand. Lockdown came. I spent the first 3 weeks lying on the sofa, eating far too much chocolate, drinking far too much wine, and watching rubbish on Netflix. And then I thought, Pat, this is ridiculous. This could go on for a few more weeks, because at the time we really thought COVID was going to be short-lived. I thought, Pat, you've got to do something. This is crazy. Why don't you write a book? So I just got out some paper, started writing, stayed up day and night for 2 weeks and finished my first book, which is this one called Daisy. If I hadn't been dumped and if we hadn't had COVID, I don't know if I would ever have got round to writing a book. It was just all the circumstances combined at the right time. And here we are, 3 years later, I've just published book number 8. So very, very exciting.
Pat, you are the most prolific writer I've interviewed in the length of time you've been publishing. We are about the same age, and I've only published 2 books, and you have 8.
Well, mine are all quite short. They're not great long tomes. But I think now that I've discovered my passion, I can't stop. You know, if someone said to me, you can never write another book, I would probably go crazy, because it has undoubtedly saved my sanity. Because when you've been in a long marriage, and it was my second marriage, and you've suddenly, your world's been turned upside down, it's very easy to go down a slippery slope. So for me, it definitely has saved me. And now I intend to write till I die. And somebody said to me quite recently, when I said that at the end of a talk, they said, but what about if you start to lose your marbles? I said, well, that doesn't matter. I'll carry on writing. If no one wants to read it, it doesn't matter. But it's fulfilling a need in me. So, yeah, I'm thrilled to be an author now.
I think writing is like swimming. We can do it for the rest of our lives, because next month I'm interviewing a woman who published another book at age 101.
That's wonderful. That's so wonderful.
It really is.
Yeah.
I've got to hear more about this Abandoned Wives Handbook that you've written.
Well, it's a very tiny, you don't mind if I just quickly show the book?
No.
It's a very tiny little book. I made it purposely small so it could fit into a handbag. I didn't want to write it. It's not a book I ever meant to write. But last year, I was in the middle of writing another book, and I woke up at 3 in the morning. And you will know, as an author, you get your best ideas at 3 in the morning. And if you don't write them down, by the time you wake up, they're gone, never ever to come back. So I got this thought at 3 in the morning, Pat, you should write about your experiences to help other people. So I just put it on the back shelf. I thought, no, absolutely not. I really don't want to write about that. And then the idea kept coming to me. In the end, I thought, maybe I should. So what I've done, I've just done it like a little, I call it a dictionary of distress. So it's just like little tiny bite-sized chunks alphabetically of how you might be feeling and how, how to deal with it, really. But as I say on the back, I'm not an expert. I'm merely someone who's lived through one of life's great traumas and come through, survived. So yeah, I'm actually very proud of it, Julia. In fact, it's my best-selling book, ironically. It sells all the time on Amazon. And then I get these lovely messages and reviews from people saying how much it's helped them. And so, yeah, it was obviously meant to be.
Well, unfortunately, you're representing a lot of us, and I'm glad that you can put that experience into good use.
Yes, yes. Well, it's, as I said, it's not something I ever wanted or hoped to write, but now I'm really glad I have done. So.
And how did you make it all the way to New Zealand from Britain?
Well, when I was young, in my 20s, with my first husband, we went to live in the Fiji Islands for 2 years, which from the UK was a huge deal. I mean, ironically, from where I am now, it's only a quick 3-hour hop. But from the UK, it was like the furthest point in the world you could go to virtually. And in the 1970s, it was very different there. And we were there for 2 years, and it just sparked my love of anything totally different. We then had to go back to the UK, blah, 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 moving on, another husband, another new life. And then my second husband, when my daughter was 2, I didn't have her until I was 43. When she was 2, he was a teacher. He decided to do a teacher exchange to New Zealand for a year. So we did. I absolutely fell in love with it and wanted to emigrate straight away. He wasn't so sure. It took us 14 years to get back. So I didn't get back here till I was 59, I think. Yes, 59. And then when he abandoned me, he said, "Oh, I always hated living in New Zealand. I only went there because you wanted to." So he stayed in England. Yeah, so that's how I got here, really. I absolutely love it. When my marriage broke up, I was in England at the time when he dumped me. And he refused to come back here. And all my friends over there said, Pat, stay in England. I said, no, I can't. New Zealand is home. Even though Lucy at the time was living in London, I knew that was only temporary. I knew she'd come back. And she has now. She's been back 3 years. So everything in my world is good now. But, I think sometimes you have to go through the worst to appreciate the best.
That's so true. And I have done that in my own life as well. But New Zealand is just so exotic sounding, and everyone just claims it's just one of the most beautiful spots in the entire planet.
Yeah, it's got a bit of everything. I think that's the thing. But I think the best thing about it really is the fact that it's got such a small population. We have exactly the same problems as the rest of the world, the same social problems, but because our population is so small, it obviously isn't magnified in quite the same way. Like land mass is virtually the same as the UK, where there are 70 plus million people. And here we've only got 5 million. So, it's a different thing, but we have the same social problems, just on a smaller scale.
That certainly makes a difference. What do you think is the most challenging part of your artistic process? It's certainly not speed of writing.
No, the writing is a doddle. I mean, sometimes if I get asked to write a short story for an anthology or something, which I've done a few of those, I can do a short story in an afternoon, a day, if I get an idea in my head. So the writing process is incredibly easy for me. The marketing is the bit that I find most challenging. I mean, I'm getting better at it. I've kind of taught myself all about the different social medias. Haven't tried TikTok yet. That's on my list, but that may be banned anyway, so that's probably not an issue. My favorite bit is actually in person, doing talks. Like I just last weekend did a big book fair, the biggest in New Zealand, with I think over 80 authors from New Zealand and Australia. Those are my favorite kind of marketings because you actually get to talk face to face with people. I do this big display of all my books, and I thoroughly enjoy it. And meeting other authors is wonderful because it's like I've found my tribe at last. Although we write in totally different genres, we all have the same, I guess, the same base we're working from. It's it's a joy. So those would be my favorites. And I like doing public speaking. But the actual trying to get people to buy your book bit, I find tricky. I don't like to be too pushy. I'm not one of the people that keeps buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. I try to be a bit more subtle. But that's probably to my detriment because it probably means I don't sell as many books as if I was pushy. But I guess you can't change your basic personality. And I'm not really a pushy person. So,
well, most writers I've found are introverts. Most writers want to stay home and write. They don't want to be out promoting themselves. I do love meeting with the population, the readers. And so I love book clubs. And I don't know how many book clubs you have in your area, but now with Zoom, we can zoom into people's living rooms all around the world. So, wherever you find a book club, it's just so exciting for writers to be able to hear the readers discuss their work, and also for the readers to have an actual author among their midst, because so many of us have been in book clubs. My book club's been operating for 30 years, and we've had, just a couple of authors in that entire time. So you get to feel like a celebrity when you go to a book club meeting.
Yes, you're right. Well, that's actually something I would love to do because I love obviously talking about my books and stuff like that. So if you've got any hints on how I can get some intros into that I would be delighted to hear because that's something I would really enjoy. I've done it a couple of times and I do love it. But again, it's the whole not being perhaps pushy enough to say, hey, would you like to invite me to your book club? So I shall rely on you for some tips, Julia, on that one.
Well, the internet is a big help in trying to find book clubs in certain areas, and some that pertain to your books. My first book was the platform was adoption because I'm an adopted child. So it was easy for me to find book clubs that wanted to hear about that topic, and every library has book clubs, so you can always start there.
Hey, thank you. That's great. I will.
Pat, tell us a little bit about the passage you've brought to share today and then read from it so we can hear your tone and voice.
Okay. Well, I had a bit of I couldn't quite decide which book to read from. So when all else fails, you go to your firstborn. So this is Daisy on the poster behind me, and that's the one I wrote during COVID. The interesting thing is historical fiction. The interesting thing was I had no idea what I was going to write about at all. I just got this idea to write a book. And for my birthday the previous year, my daughter had sent me from London this very, very lengthy book about council housing throughout the ages. Now, I was born in a council house. I don't know what you call them in the States, like a state house. But I love architecture. So this book combined the two, but it was full of words and the odd picture. And I put off reading it. So I thought, just before I started the book, I thought, I'll just have a read at that. Just by the after 10 minutes, it was full of post-it notes like this. I just made all these notes, and I suddenly thought I could write a bit about architecture. Well, ironically, there's virtually no architecture in this book, but that's kind of what inspired me. So basically, it's a story about a young girl who gets pregnant. When she's very young, and her story ties in with a young man who was born in Alabama, on a cotton plantation, but they don't get together, but their stories are woven together throughout the years. So I'll just read this little bit. So it's 1909, and it's about the young man who was born in the plantation into a very wealthy family. Of course, Theo hadn't been allowed to travel alone. His manservant Mattie accompanied him, and what adventures they had. They had been friends since they were children. Mattie was the grandson of old Freddie and lived on the plantation. He had been given the job as Theo's manservant when the boys were just 11 years old. They spend all their time together, so that we might as well give the boy a job and a title. Theo's father had said this when his other sons complained that they weren't given their own servants until they were 18. The two young boys had a wonderful time growing up together. Mattie was only a few months older than Theo, and of course was never treated as anything less than a brother by the younger boy. So, as they travelled through Europe for their grand tour, these two tall and very handsome young men attracted a lot of attention. They were 22 years old by now. They never gave any thought to their different skin colours, so it came as a surprise when people found them an exotic pair. They were invited to parties and balls wherever they went. At the Carnivale in Venice, they lost their tour guide in the foggy February alleyways and emerged to find themselves outside a palace on the Grand Canal, each wrapped in the arms of a courtesan. They smoked hookah pipes in Morocco, waltzed in Vienna, gambled on the Côte d'Azur, and rode camels in the Sahara. In short, they had an absolutely wonderful time, and the plantation in Alabama seemed like another world. After the boys had spent 4 years aimlessly wandering around with no rich heiresses to marry in sight, Theo's father began to make demands. He sent telegraphs threatening to cut off Theo's allowance unless he found a wife. Theo replied, "Dear father, thank you for your concern. I have searched high and low throughout Europe and beyond for a woman suitable to bring home to you, but to no avail. I was thinking that perhaps we should now go to England, as you wanted, to visit the cotton mills of Lancashire. Perhaps there I will find a nice English bride."
That's so intriguing, Pat.
Oh, good.
I look forward to reading the book.
Oh, thank you. Well, I've written a sequel called The Second Daisy, which several people have said to me, that's not very imaginative. And I said, no, but it is what it says on the cover. And I'm currently writing The Third Daisy, which I was going to finish this year, early this year. But I've actually planned a trip to the States now in September. And so I'm going to wait until I get there, because I'm going to Alabama, Harlem, and New York, all of which are listed in the Daisy books. So I thought while I'm there, I might get more inspiration. So I'll hold off finishing that book until I've been there.
Well, you might change your accent in Alabama, Pat, because that's where 6 of my grandchildren live, and they have a very Alabama accent.
Well, it's very funny because I have been to Alabama before. I have a very dear friend who lives there. She's English, but she moved there 20 odd years ago. And I went to stay with her. I've been there a couple of times, and I just love the accent. And I find myself when I'm there kind of drifting into it slightly, which is, it kind of is a bit rude because it comes across like you're mimicking somebody. But I'm fascinated. I love that accent.
Well, Americans love a British accent, so you'll be quite popular wherever you go. They'll just say, just talk to me and let me hear you talk.
Well, the main reason I'm going to the States is I'm going to catch up with some women that during COVID I wrote a book with called The Warrior Women Project. And I was just approached by one of the ladies who was writing it, and she said, "Pat, will you put in a chapter?" And I said, "Well, do I really qualify? I mean, they're mostly from China and Africa and India, and very glamorous, highly, very sophisticated, very well educated women. And I said, do I really qualify, this little kind of white girl from England? And they said, yes. And then we had to have a photo shoot. And I said, look, I'm going to pull out of we did it all on Zoom because it was during COVID. I said, I'm going to pull out of the project. I loathe having my photograph taken. I said, I can't, you're all young and beautiful, and they're all young enough to be my daughters. And in unison, they all said, all these faces on the screen, all said, don't be ridiculous, Pat. Just slap on some red lipstick and high heels. You'll be fine. So they kind of shamed me into it. So after about 2 hours of the photo shoot, I'm going, like a model. So sometimes I think to be lifted out of your comfort zone is great. Anyway, we've never met in person, but we're having a reunion in Atlanta in September. So I'm hugely excited about that. But because of my accent, they call me the Queen Mother, because obviously I'm old enough to be their mother, and I talk a bit like the Queen did. So
that's great. What a wonderful visit that will be.
Yes, it will. It's very exciting. So I'm kind of tying in a few other places at the same time.
That'll be wonderful. And I think you've created the correct formula with your series, and they say we have to write at least 3 in a series to even start earning out. And
yes.
my latest book is called The Fifth Daughter of Thorn Ranch. And I was going to go back and start with the first daughter and bring it all the way through. So I like your titles.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, I do too. I sometimes think simplicity is key. You can be too fancy, can't you?
Yes, and some series you can't tell which is the first and what order you're supposed to read them. And, some are standalone, but others I want to read in order.
Yes, me too. Otherwise, you're constantly going back to check who that person is and who they're related to. And yeah.
Do you have writing groups there in New Zealand?
Yes, there are some. I personally have never joined one, simply because I never planned to be a writer, really. Life, I was doing other things. I think for myself, I would find I'm very independent. I'm probably a bit of a control freak. So nobody reads my work except my editor, Colleen, until it's published. Not even my daughter. I present her with a finished book, but it's all done and dusted by then. I kind of just like to do it myself. I mean, obviously I have editors and formatters and stuff, but the physical writing, I probably don't take criticism very well, if I'm honest. And so I don't like criticizing other people, and I'm probably not very good at receiving it. So I'm not sure that a writer's group for me, I might be wrong. They may be wonderfully supportive and I would love them, but I never have joined one, and I can't imagine I will, but who knows? I never imagined I'd be a writer. So never say never.
You have your routine, and whatever you do is working. I mean, not many of us have 8 books after just beginning writing 3 years ago. I mean, that's great. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
Thank you.
What does writing success look like to you personally?
I think for me, it's just the joy of looking at my books and thinking, wow, I did those. And knowing that I'm leaving a bit of a legacy, that people will remember I actually walked this earth. And on that score, once I'd written the 2 daisies, I realized how much I loved research, which was so funny because at school I hated it. I wasn't a good student. But I think today with the internet, it's so easy, isn't it? And I thought, actually, why don't I write? I like writing historical fiction. Why don't I write about my own ancestors? So I've got a series now. I've just this Saturday is the publication or the launch of my latest book, Dot and Ben, which I will just quickly show you, which is this one. So my ancestors series are all green. I try to keep a theme. So the daisy is all yellow and these are all green, and this one you probably can't see, but on that picture on the front, those are my parents when they were 19 and they were fighting World War II. So hard to imagine 19-year-olds nowadays doing that. But yeah, so I started with my great grandparents on both sides, wrote their stories as much as I knew about them, and then fictionalized the rest. And then this latest one is my parents. But the interesting thing is my daughter's response. She's 30. She only knew my parents, her grandparents, for a little while before they died. Obviously, never knew anyone beyond that. And she said to me recently, Mum, I'm so thrilled you've written these books. She said, because it's brought my ancestors to life. She said, they're not just boring old photos now. They're real people living in my head. So that's great. I will carry on that vein, I think.
I definitely think that that's what's so important in life. I tell writers to write journals, even if you don't plan to publish them, because our families don't know our ancestors. Not many of us have a complete picture of where we came from and who we belong to and how we became the people that we are. And I just know your daughter is so proud of you and all that you're accomplishing. And you use the word legacy, and I use that a lot because I just think that long after we're gone, we're going to still be on those library shelves and mean something to our family members and show them that it's never too late to do this thing that we love. And one of my granddaughters looked at me. She had to choose a book to read for a book project in school. And she said, I'm going to choose your book, Juju, because not everybody's grandmothers write books. So I was thrilled with that little bit of legacy.
That's so wonderful. That's so wonderful. Yeah. And it's funny because you're probably the same as me, Julia. It's kind of just me now. I just write books. I've just got all these books. And when someone says, oh my God, you've written a book, how exciting. I just think, oh yeah, I suppose it is quite exciting because it's just become part of me now. And it's only when other people point out that it is a huge achievement to write one book, isn't it?
Yes. And think of all the books that we've read in our lifetimes and how we think that those authors are just so incredible. And now we can join their ranks.
Yeah. Although I do still feel like I don't really kind of quite deserve to be there. But when I get things like a message to say that a library in Indiana has bought one of my books, I get this little excited. I think, oh my goodness, someone in Indiana is reading my book now. It's a constant thrill. I don't think I'm ever going to get over the excitement. You're probably the same.
I am the same. And I know we all have the imposter syndrome, and we always think somebody is doing it bigger and better than we ever could. But I think we have our place on the ladder of success.
I think you're right.
And I'm going to be like you, Pat. I've always wanted to kill off an ex-husband, so I might do that next. Well, Pat, this has been a great visit all the way from New Zealand to Texas. But as always, our last interview question is, our writers over 50 are quite unique. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
Yeah, I would say if there's any tiny little bit of you that feels you want to write, just do it. Just do it. Doesn't matter if you think it's no good, just get it out there because you can polish it later. But if you've got something in your head, you need to get it out. And I think inside all of us, there are lots of things, even if it's not a whole book. Just jot things down. And then one day you'll just think, oh, I'm going to write a book now. I've got a friend in France who's a wedding planner. And I constantly say to her, Sam, write down all the funny incidents, the sad, because one day you can pull them all together in the most wonderful book. So yeah, I think just do it. Just do it. That's my advice. Because it's such fun.
That's great advice. As always, we need to be sitting in our seats and writing and getting our words on paper and out into the world. And so we just appreciate your being with us here today. And we can now count you among our authors over 50.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's been such a joy. The time's just whizzed past.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.